23 minutes, that's how long Hank Skinner watched a phone on a concrete wall. The phone that would save his life or let him die. It was 5:37 p.m., March 24th, 2010. Execution was scheduled for 6 a.m. He'd already eaten his last meal, 3 pieces of spicy fried chicken, 2 catfish fillets, a bacon cheeseburger with a large order of fries, a pitcher of chocolate milkshake. He'd already said goodbye to his family, had his last rites performed by a priest from the Vatican. They'd anointed him with oil on his hands and his head, extreme unction. The last rites, confirmation, communion, the full ritual. I went through the whole thing.
Whole thing. The only thing was they didn't kill me.
And he could see it. From where he sat in the holding cell, just 5 steps away, the gurney where they would strap him down, the arm boards where they'd extend his limbs, the microphone hanging from the ceiling where he'd speak his final words, the windows where witnesses would watch him die. Skinner describes that moment with an eerie calm.
It's just a barred front cell. As I was sitting there eating and talking on the phone, I could look to my left and I could see the doorway, I could see the gurney, I could see the arm boards, I could see the microphone hanging down, and I could see the windows where the witnesses watched through there. So I was literally looking at my death while I was sitting there eating.
The death house at the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas, executes someone approximately once a week. It's a machine, a bureaucratic process refined over decades, efficient, clinical, precise. And on this particular Wednesday evening, that machine was calibrated to kill Hank Skinner at exactly 6 p.m. But then the lieutenant walked in. He had something to tell Skinner, something that would turn those final 23 minutes into an eternity.
The chaplain told me, he said, you look like God had touched you. He said, you were just beatific. He said, you were just beaming and smiling. Your eyes were all, And then the lieutenant comes in there and tells me, he says, your lawyer told you should be able to stay. I said, yeah. He said, listen, I need to tell you something. And I said, what? He said, you see them 2 phones over there on that wall? I said, yes, sir. He said, that's the governor's line and the attorney general's line. Unless one of those phones ring and tell us to stand down, this execution's going forward at 6 o'clock because we do not accept stays from defense counsel.
One phone call, 23 minutes. Hank Skinner has been on death row in Texas for 17 years, convicted of a triple homicide in Pampa, Texas, a crime which he vehemently denies having committed. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. Evidence that could prove his innocence exists. DNA evidence, forensic evidence, blood spatter analysis, hair samples, biological material, evidence that has never been tested, and the state of Texas refuses to test it. This is the story of a man who came within minutes of execution, a man who changed Supreme Court precedent, a man who has lived 17 years in a concrete box, knowing exactly how he will die if that phone doesn't ring. But it's also about something deeper. Something most of us never consider. What happens to the human mind when time stops functioning normally? When you wash your clothes by hand for 17 years until your fingers bend permanently? When you dream about washing machines and wake up crying? When the only physical contact with your daughter is a pane of glass? What does it mean to live inside the machinery of death? I'm taking you inside death row, deep inside, to a place where men count the expansion joints on a bridge as they're driven to their execution, where breakfast is served at 3 a.m. and lunch at 10 a.m. and time becomes a meaningless loop, where you can hear other inmates crying at night because they're suffering alongside you, where the state of Texas kills someone about once a week. And you need to hear this story. But before we go further, hit that subscribe button. This case is still active, the evidence still untested, and I need you here when the story reaches its conclusion, because what happens to Hank Skinner could determine whether innocent people live or die in this country. Now let's go to Pampa, Texas, where this all began, population 18,000, 50 miles east of Amarillo in the flat, windswept panhandle of North Texas. If you've never been to this part of the country, imagine endless horizons. Sparse vegetation, wind that never stops, towns that feel left behind by time, where the local newspaper office and the courthouse are the only buildings that look maintained. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where fundamentalist Christian values run deep, where the death penalty isn't a political debate, it's an accepted fact of justice. David Bowser, the local journalist who covered Skinner's case, put it bluntly,
"It's a very conservative community, so and there's probably more interest outside of Pampa now than there is in, so they would feel justice had been done." What is your opinion about justice in a case like Skinner? I have no problem with the death penalty. I question how it's interpreted many times, whether justice has been done, but I have no problem with the death penalty. I have no doubt that Hank Skinner is guilty of what he did. If somehow it's evidence comes back that exonerates him, that's even a better story, so we'll see.
New Year's Eve, 1993. While most of America was counting down to midnight, planning parties, making resolutions, something dark was brewing in a modest house in one of Pampa's more forlorn neighborhoods. Hank Skinner was 31 years old. He was living with his girlfriend, Twila Busby, and her 2 mentally impaired sons. Twila was in her 40s. The house they shared was small, unremarkable, the kind of place you drive past without noticing. That night, Twila went to a party. Skinner stayed home. He'd been sick with a cold, taking medication. He was also drinking heavily, a combination that, according to him, rendered him unconscious on the couch sometime before midnight. He says he never woke up, never heard Twila return, never heard what happened next. What happened next was carnage. By the time the sun rose on New Year's Day, 1994, 3 people were dead. Twila Busby had been beaten to death in the front room of the house, beaten so savagely, so brutally, that when police first found her body, they couldn't identify her. Her face was unrecognizable. The weapon? A heavy object never definitively identified. Some reports suggest a club or axe handle. Her 2 sons, both mentally impaired, both vulnerable, were stabbed. One son was found in his bunk bed in the back bedroom. He'd been killed where he slept. The other son somehow made it out of the house. Investigators would later piece together his desperate flight.
The Twila's 2 sons, the night of the murder, she was beaten to death in the front room. Both sons were stabbed. One of them in his bunk bed in the back bedroom where they found him, and the other one came apparently out the front door, down the sidewalk, all the way down the street, down the sidewalk, and to the house on the corner, which is no longer there. Knocked at the door and then collapsed from the front porch. You're speaking about a sidewalk, but there's no sidewalk. There was. And Hank Skinner himself, was there a lot of evidence on him, as far as you remember? My understanding was that there was blood on his clothing, and he had cut his hand, and she was sewing it up. She's who, Andrea, his former girlfriend. So he had a girlfriend and a former girlfriend nearby. Yeah, that's where he was arrested. The sheriff and the district attorney investigator found him over there, standing in a closet in a back bedroom of the house trailer. We're going over to the house where the boy was found. He came down here, there were drops of blood, and he apparently stayed on the sidewalk. Came down to the corner, over, would have come up this way, up on the porch. And there was a house here. The gentleman that lived here found the boy collapsed on the porch, called police. From there, they tried to follow the blood back, drops of blood back to that house, and that's where they found Twila Busby. And initially, they couldn't identify her. Why? She was so badly beaten. She was bludgeoned to death. The 2 boys were stabbed.
Another problem Skinner had was his defense, was the cut that the police found on his hand when they arrested him. Skinner explains it this way.
My head had a suppurating wound. I just had the drainage tube removed where it was surgically worked on, and it was still leaking, so, do we have a scar there? Oh, yes, the very man. When it goes from here all the way up to here, and from here all the way out to there. I nearly filleted the thumb from off my hand. It was a shop accident. You can see that there's mass missing out of my hand. It's all sunk in. Look at this one. You see the difference, right? So, I've got less than 48% use left in this hand. My thumb will go only to there. This thumb goes all the way here. If ever the evidence in question is tested, the results might be inconclusive, incriminate him further, or, as Skinner hopes, point to someone else. This guy who killed Twila, I firmly believe it was her uncle. I believe he snatched those knives off the counter and used them to kill the boys. That makes perfect sense. But he touched them one time. I touched them 650,000 times. I used them every day. So did other people in the house. So let's just play the odds like we're in Vegas, But what are the odds of his DNA being on it versus my DNA? So the chances are, we test this stuff, I could be executed for fixing brisket sandwiches. That's what it amounts to. That sounds insane. But you have to laugh or cry, you know. So anyway, I think what holds the greatest promise is the jacket that was found beside her body, because it's absolutely not my jacket. It's a man's extra large 44-46, which was the size that he wore. It has sweat stains in the armpits. The cuffs and the forearms of the sleeves have medium velocity impact blood spatter all over them. And the criminalist, who's the best in the country, Max Courtney, who examined this evidence, he says that jacket was worn by the assailant. That's how the blood is all over the forearms of the sleeves, because when he was killing her with the club, it's splattering all over him. So I think that it was definitely him. But we're going to have conclusive evidence. It can't just be something here or there, you know, something ephemeral. It's got to be something that's dead on. But the chances of it being me in an innocent way are so great, because I use those knives every day. And so, you know, the state is not going to be willing to see that. If the DNA on the handle of that knife comes back to me, they go, so, oh, that's it, that proves that he done it. And the public will be more than ready to kill me, because they're more...
Medical records confirm the prior injury, but in the chaos of a triple homicide investigation, with pressure to solve the case, with a community demanding justice, that detail got buried beneath the weight of other evidence. And then there's Skinner's theory about who actually committed these murders. Twila's uncle, a man with access to the house, a man who wore the right size jacket, a man Skinner has named consistently for 17 years. But here's the impossible situation Skinner faces. If the DNA on the knife handles comes back as his, and statistically it probably will because he used those knives every single day, the state will say it proves guilt. The public will be satisfied. Justice served. If the DNA on the jacket comes back as Twila's uncle's DNA, the state might argue it's inconclusive. Maybe he'd visited recently. Maybe he'd left the jacket there innocently. The only way to know is to test everything. The knives, the jacket, the blood under Twila's fingernails, the hair samples collected at the scene, the biological evidence. Test it all. Let forensic science speak. But for 17 years, the state of Texas has refused. The district attorney's position is clear. The evidence against Skinner was overwhelming at trial. The jury convicted him. The appeals courts upheld the conviction. Testing additional DNA would only serve to delay justice, to give Skinner another avenue for appeals, to keep the case alive indefinitely. In her view, justice has already been served. Skinner sees it differently.
Yeah, can you translate the ruling very briefly for a taxi driver?
Okay, the ruling says that for the first time in the history of the United States, you can sue a district attorney to force her to turn over DNA evidence in a capital case if she withheld it and refuses to let it post-trial, after trial.
Congratulations, because it's way beyond your case. It's a landmark.
Now any person who has DNA, or not just DNA evidence, but any forensic evidence which could prove them innocent, if the state is withholding it and refuses to turn it over, you can sue them and force them to do so. But you know, the thing about it is that a lawsuit like that should be so unnecessary, because any district attorney has an ethical obligation to release the innocent. And if he's holding somebody that he knows could be innocent, he has an ethical obligation to test the evidence and see if they're innocent. And if they are, he should let them go.
And in your case, it is within the discretion of the district attorney just to say, I'm handing it over.
Yes, without lawsuit, without anything, just yes. She is in sole custody of the evidence. She is a custodian of the evidence, and she could turn it over to my lawyers. She doesn't have to have a court order or the permission of the judge or anything else. She can just say, here, go test it, let's find out. So I don't understand why she wouldn't want to do that.
The answer might be simple. Once you execute someone, the case is closed. Final. No more appeals, no more questions, but if you test evidence and it creates reasonable doubt, then you have a problem. Then you have to reopen everything. Admit the system might have failed. Acknowledge that the machinery of death might have killed an innocent man. It's easier to let the execution proceed, which brings us to what happened in 2010, when Texas set Skinner's execution date. To understand what happened to Hank Skinner, you have to understand what death row actually is. Not the Hollywood version, not the Law and Order dramatization, the real thing. Skinner lives at the Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas. He's been there for 17 years. His cell is 5 feet wide, 9 feet long. Everything is concrete. The bunk is concrete. The desk is concrete. The walls are concrete. The sink where he washes his clothes is concrete. The windows don't get washed. When it rains, dust and dirt coat the glass, so the view of the outside world is perpetually obscured, filtered, like looking at life through a dirty lens. It's like Leonardo da Vinci used to say, Skinner notes, sfumato. It's not what you see, but how you see it. The view that you get of the world is overcoated. Time doesn't function normally in this place.
Really, there's no sense of time in here, because although we can see the sunlight out the windows, we know when it's night and day. There is activity here 24 hours a day, and the same activity. They have the SSIs come in to clean the pod. They're banging around, making all kind of noise. The same thing at nighttime.
It's a lots of noise.
Yes, and they feed around the clock. They feed lunch at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They feed breakfast at 3 a.m. They feed lunch at 10 a.m. So they feed all around the clock. So basically, it's very disorienting, because lots of times you'll wake up and you'll not know where the hell you're at or what meal it is, because usually you wake up at mealtime. That's when you'll be sleeping, right? And they'll come, hey, you going to eat? Bang on you, hey, you going to eat, And so, you have to, what is it? You ask them, what is it? Because what it is how you figure out what time it is. Time really has no meaning in here, It's like my days have elongated from 28 to 34 hours. The prison windows down there in my cell they don't wash them, okay? So as it rains, it knocks up dust and dirt on the window, and so it's pretty much coated. So the view that you get of the world is like over-coated, you know what I mean?
And there's noise, constant noise. Prisoners cleaning the pod at all hours, guards making rounds, the sound of metal doors, keys jangling, shoes on concrete, and at night, something worse. In the nighttime, guys, you hear them crying. Skinner says quietly. You hear them calling out because they're suffering. It's a place of human bondage and human suffering. It's just a bad place. They execute someone here about once a week, but Skinner's proximity to death became more than abstract in February 2010. He received an execution date, February 24th. He describes the days leading up to it with eerie specificity. 2 of his best friends were also on death watch at the same time. My first date was February 24th. Segala had a date March 2nd. And Maxwell had a date March 11th. Maxwell was my best friend here, and we'd been side by side in the cells for 3 years together down on F-Pod. He found a grim consolation in the sequence. At least I don't have to watch them die because I'm going first. But something happened. 7 days before his scheduled execution, a judge ruled the death warrant was improperly drawn. Skinner's date was moved forward 30 days to March 24th. Now he was immediately after Segala and Maxwell. So, more or less, I had to watch them die, Skinner says, and I had to go over there myself.
And my first date was February the 24th. Segala had a date March 2nd, and Maxwell had a date March 11th. Maxwell was my best friend here. We've been side by side in the cells for 3 years together down on F-Pod. So, I was thinking, well, at least I don't have to watch them die, because I'm going first, you know what I'm saying? So that was some consolation. And as the time drug on, it got closer and closer. I got within 7 days of execution, February 24th. And the judge agreed that the warrant was no good. It was improperly drawn. And so he modified my date forward 30 days to March the 24th. So now I'm immediately after Segala and Maxwell. So more or less I had to watch them die. Then I had to go over there myself. I wasn't scared in the sense of dying and I'm not going to exist anymore. Okay, I was scared of the blackness, the unknown. You know what I mean? You get closer and closer and closer, and they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you. This thing's something you do every day. You don't go over there and lay down and die every day,
The journey to the death house is 41 miles from the Polunsky unit to the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas. It's a drive most people will never experience. A drive Skinner describes in sensory detail that burns into your memory. 4 officers transport you. A major, a captain, a lieutenant, and a sergeant. You're locked in a dog cage inside the van, literally a cage made of chain link fencing, the kind you'd use to kennel an animal.
That the people who handle you when they come to pick you up at this unit, there's a major, a captain, a lieutenant, and a sergeant. 4 people in the van with you, okay? The driver, the front seat passengers, the jump seat driver that's in front of the dog cage. There's a dog cage inside the van, and that's what you're locked in. It's made out of this stuff right here. And so it's like this. There's one guy sitting in front of it. There's one guy sitting behind it between the cage and the back doors. They're very stern and sincere about what they want you to do. They have a protocol. They do this once a week, so they're very good at it, you know. They're the team who handles this, okay? They're the death house team. That's all they do. And they get paid extra pay for it, okay? They're required to tell you that we need to tell you, too, that if anyone tries to stop, there's a caravan, there's a car in front, and there's 2 chase cars behind. They're all armed to the teeth, okay? And they tell you right off the bat, look, if anybody tries to stop this van and tries to get you out of here, we will kill you first. And they got guns. I mean, the guy in the jump seat, this one back here has got a shotgun. This one in the front's got a pistol and an AR-15. High-tech weaponry, you know, and they tell you we will shoot you first, so you need to know that. So I couldn't free you if I tried. No, even if I had a bazooka and a tank, I couldn't. You would be dead before I could rescue you. The strangest thing for me was the people in the cars behind us. They were pointing at me like, you know, look, there they go. They got some prisoner in the van, you know. I wondered what they would say if they knew that guy's going to die. They're taking him to kill him. When we crossed the lake, you know, there's a certain smell that's on the water. I always used to smell that when I would go catfishing at night. Well, that made me think about that. When we were going across that bridge going to Huntsville, it's a very long bridge, you know, and it's got those expansion joints in it, so every 6 or 7 turns of the tires, pa-pump, 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 pa-pump. If I could tell you, there's 26 joints in that bridge. 26, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. When they get you over there, you've got from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, 5 hours. But it goes just like that. Time is flying so fast at 5 o'clock, they take the phone away from you, okay? And from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, you're eating your last meal. They start serving it to you at 4 o'clock. They just hand it. You have to pull your mattress back and hand it to you in the bowls. Okay, so I'm sitting there eating, I'm talking on the phone, and the chaplain tells me, you're going to have to hang the phone up. I can't let you go any further, you know. He said, you done went 15 minutes, 13 minutes after, so. I said, well, I tell you what, I said, I want to make one more call. He said, who do you want to call? I said, I want to call my lawyer. And he says, okay. He said, I'll let you call your lawyer. So he dialed the number, and the lawyer answers, Hank? And I said, yeah. And he said, it's Doug Robinson, my lead counsel. And he says, Hank? I said, yeah. He said, man, you have the most uncanny sense of timing of any man I have ever met in my life. I said, why do you say that? He said, no sooner had I heard the click, the Supreme Court clerk just hung up the phone, than you came on the line. He said, I didn't even hear the phone ring. And he said, they granted you a stay. And when he said that, I couldn't hear anything. Tears started running down my eyes, and my legs give out, and I slid down the wall, and my ears were buzzing. I felt like somebody had lifted a 1,000-pound weight off of my chest. And I didn't realize that I felt like that until after this happened, you know? So it was scary, you know what I mean? And so I thought, well, why am I so upset now? I should have been upset that they was going to kill me. But I was handling that, you know what I'm saying? But this news, now I've got to stay. And so I still had some of my food left sitting up there on the bunk. So I got to looking at that food, and suddenly I was ravenous. I was eating it before, but I was eating it kind of slow. But now I wanted to just devour it all. And so I got up and I grabbed the food and I started eating it. I was so elated and so happy that the chaplain told me, he said, you look like God had touched you. He said, you were just beatific. He said, you were just beaming and smiling. Your eyes were all, you know. And then the lieutenant comes in there and tells me, he says, your lawyer told you got to stay? I said, yeah. He said, listen, I need to tell you something. And I said, what? He said, you see them 2 phones over there on that wall? I said, yes, sir. He said, that's the governor's line and the attorney general's line. Unless one of those phones ring and tell us to stand down, this execution's going forward at 6 o'clock because we do not accept stays from defense counsel. And how long did it take until the phone rang? That was the longest 23 minutes of my life. It was 5:13. The phone did not ring until 20 minutes till 6 o'clock. That they got the official order to stand down. When the phone rung, the lieutenant went over there and picked it up real smartly and got on the phone and said, hello. And he said, and you're sure? And they said, yeah. He said, we're to stand down. And they said, that's right. There's no execution tonight. He said, we thank you very much. Hung the phone up. He said, Skinner, you got to stay. You know what was the saddest part of after I got to stay? Okay, so I'm eating the last meal, and they're telling me, here, give me them plates back. I said, no, I'm going to finish this. I said, you know, they fixed it for me. I'm going to finish it. And so he said, but we're going to take you back to the Ponsky unit. And that's when it dawned on me, you know what I'm saying? The only thing that I've won right now is they're going to take me back over there to that hellhole I just came from. Wherever I sit right now. Yes. See, It looks pretty nice out here, you know what I mean? It's a whole different story back there. You don't see the death row, we cannot see, yes, we are not allowed. Yes, and I want to say this, they do not treat us mean, and they do not mistreat us. That's got nothing to do with what it is. What it is all these guys, the oppression, all these guys sentenced to death, all these guys that are suffering this with me, okay? And so that's what makes it so bad. It is a place of human bondage and human suffrage.
Back to Polunsky, back to the concrete cell, back to the place where men cry at night, back to washing clothes by hand, back to time that doesn't function normally, back to dreaming about avocados and washing machines. The reprieve wasn't freedom. It was a return to captivity.
And when you did this trip, and you knew you were going to Wolf's unit, to the death house, could you see the landscape out there?
When we got to the end of the driveway, I was so happy to be leaving this place. I hate this place. I despise this place. It was almost like seeing something alien. Say if someone took you to, like, say, Israel and set you down in the middle of the Holy Land, it was the very first time you'd ever saw it. You know, you'd be in shock, in awe. You know what I mean? So when you see stuff like that, you know that you're going to die, you know, the whole thing. I was, at certain points over there, I was just laughing insanely to myself because it's like, this can't be real. There's no way in hell. This is really happening. I'm having a bad dream. And I'm going to wake up in a minute. Somebody's going to tell me, you know, what's wrong with you, man? You're talking in your sleep again, you know.
But it was real. The landscape outside the van window was real. The happy worm bait shop they passed, the apostles on the road to death, random people going about their normal lives unaware they were witnessing a man's final journey. I can't imagine the psychological whiplash of that moment, from death to life to realizing life means going back to death row. What would go through your mind? Comment below. But Skinner's legal battle was far from over. After losing his appeal in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, his lawyers came to him with grim news. Listen, this is serious. We should have won this case here, and you're now out of criminal appeals, so we don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas? Most death row inmates at this point accept their fate. The appeals process in capital cases is Byzantine, complex, and stacked against the defendant. Once you exhaust your state appeals, your federal appeals, your habeas corpus petitions, you're out of options. The machinery of death wins. But Skinner did have an idea, an unconventional idea, an idea his lawyers initially rejected. I told them what I wanted to do, and at first they said, no, that's not going to work. The Supreme Court has never allowed a prisoner to sue the district attorney. They're sovereignly immune. There's nothing you can do. Forget it. But Skinner persisted. He'd been studying a case called District Attorney's Office versus Osborne, a DNA case from Alaska that had recently been decided by the Supreme Court. He saw something in the language, a gap, a legal argument that had never been made. I went back to this Osborne decision and I told them, look at this and look at this. I think because of what this says, we can do this and make it fly. I think it'll work. His lawyers remained skeptical. The Supreme Court of the United States receives approximately 10,000 petitions every year. They grant certiorari, agree to hear the case in fewer than 100. The chances of them even hearing Skinner's case were less than 1%, but they had nothing to lose. Skinner was already under a death warrant. They filed, and then something extraordinary happened. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. Oral arguments were scheduled for October 13th, 2010. Skinner noted the date with his characteristic obsession with historical omens. Friday, October the 13th, is the day that Prince Philip the Fair gave up the Templars and got them all slaughtered. My ancestors. I took that as a good sign, as an omen. I'm a hillbilly and I'm superstitious anyway. For context, on Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of hundreds of Knights Templar, leading to their persecution and eventual destruction. Skinner sees connections between his own persecution and this medieval event. Whether this is profound pattern recognition or the mind creating meaning in chaos is impossible to say. Perhaps both. On March 7, 2011, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in Skinner's favor. Let me translate the ruling clearly because this is important. This case changed American law. For the first time in the history of the United States, the Supreme Court ruled that a convicted person has the right to sue the state to force them to turn over DNA evidence for post-conviction testing. Prior to this ruling, prosecutors had near absolute discretion. They could refuse to test evidence. They could refuse to turn it over. They could claim sovereign immunity. They were immune from being sued. Skinner v. Switzer changed that. It's way beyond my case, Skinner explains. It's a landmark. Now, any person who has DNA, and not just DNA evidence, but any forensic evidence which could prove them innocent, if the state is withholding it and refuses to turn it over, you can sue them and force them to do so. Think about the implications. How many death row inmates have evidence that was never tested? How many cases involve forensic technology that didn't exist at the time of trial? How many prosecutors are so certain of guilt that they refuse to allow testing because it might complicate their conviction? Skinner opened the door. But here's the bitter irony. The Supreme Court said Skinner has the right to sue, but they didn't order the evidence to be tested. That decision still rests with the district attorney in Gray County, Texas, and she has refused. Skinner's cell at the Polunsky unit is 5 feet wide, 9 feet long. Do the math. 45 square feet, smaller than most people's bathrooms. Everything is concrete. The walls are concrete. The bunk is concrete. The desk is concrete. The sink where he washes his clothes is concrete, and he washes his clothes by hand. Every piece of clothing, every day. For 17 years, the sink is round, so you have to knead the clothes and turn them, and so your knuckles are constantly in the bottom of the sink. He holds up his hands. The knuckles are swollen, enlarged. The fingers don't straighten completely. They're permanently bent. For years, 17 years of doing this, that's what it's done to my hands. Both of my fingers are crooked because of this. Look at those hands and understand what death row is. It's not just waiting to die. It's the slow erosion of your body through mundane tasks. Washing clothes until your fingers bend. Sleeping on concrete until your back never stops hurting. Looking through dirty windows until you forget what clear sunlight looks like. Time has warped. My days have elongated from 28 to 34 hours. Think about that. A day that lasts 34 hours, time so distorted that the very rhythm of existence becomes alien. And there are the dreams. Skinner dreams constantly, vividly. Dreams so real that waking up is a form of cruelty. He dreams about grocery stores.
Let's speak about the future. Close your eyes and think about the day you're gonna be released from here. What are you gonna do then? What's the first thing? I have dreamed it so many times, it's got to come true. I think that all the time. That's the only thing that keeps me from going insane in here. You know, my firstborn daughter, I have 3 children. I got 2 daughters and a son, and they're all 3 have different mothers. The son is the youngest. I got a middle daughter who's 28, and my oldest daughter, she just turned 30. Her birthday is 1 month to the day after mine. Okay, she was my first boy. And when I brought her home from the hospital, I was 19 years old, and I was just infatuated with this child. Look what I did. I made this. Can you believe this? I did this myself. You know what I'm saying? And had a lot of fun doing it, too. When I brought her home from the hospital, she was a daddy's girl from the moment she came out of her mother's womb. She was not sleeping in the baby bed. The only place she wanted to sleep was on daddy's chest. She cut her teeth on my collarbone. When she was little, up till she was 6 or 8 months old, she wouldn't sleep anywhere but on my chest, like a little frog with her legs pulled up to her belly, and her arms wrapped around my neck, and she'd have her little mouth right there on the side of my neck, and every few minutes she'd wake up and start sucking on my neck, And so, every morning she would wake me up. She would wake up, and when I would wake up, here's this baby right in my face, and she learned to raise herself. She's about 6 months old, she'd always be checking out my lips. She loved my lips. She would always kiss me on the bottom lip and then pat me on the cheek like, there you go, that'll hold you. You know what I'm saying? When they almost killed me, she came back into my life. 25 years she's been absent, and so we've had some marvelous visits together. Her name is Natalie Jo, and I call her Queen Natalie Jo. And there's just no way I can explain to you the bond that child and I have. And it's this glass, when she comes to see me, it's so sweet because she's right there, but I can't touch her. My own daughter, my own blood, and I can't even hug her. I can't kiss her goodbye. Now, I want to put my face in her hair and smell her hair. I want to pull her to me and hold her. I want to feel the warmth of her body against me. You know what I mean? That's the first thing. The second thing is I want to do the same thing to my wife and lots more. I want to be with my wife. We have been together for 14 years, and I have not seen her in 28 months. They took her off my visit list for bogus reasons, and so they won't let her come see me anymore. You know, I think about hugging them both at the same time, just a three-way, you know what I mean? Because my wife's pretty small, and I think I can handle both of them, just pick them up off the ground and squeeze them together. But at the same time, being so sad from losing everything earthly and dying, you know, I believe in the hereafter. It's like going on a trip and you're going to see something for the first time.
And then there's the unknown, you know, and you just vacillate between these three emotions. It just keeps getting, you know, it's like, well, what's going to happen next when I get on the other side? You know, I'll be free of this flesh. I'll be out of this flesh. I can go however I want and do whatever I want to do. But will I still be, you know, am I just going to be spread out some, maybe not nothing conscience, or what is it going to be, you know? And so you think about that, and then you think about the unknown for, you know, it's permanent. Whatever happens, you're stuck with it. You can't come back. So that's the scary part. When I was a kid, I saw a Twilight Zone episode that had Dennis Weaver. He used to be McCloud. When the scene comes on, he's in a jail cell, and the jailer is shaking his foot, and he's saying, Blackie, Blackie, wake up, wake up. Your mouthpiece is here. And so the guy wakes up, and he looks around, and he realizes he's on death row. The lawyer comes in, and he sits down, and he says, hey, I did everything I could, but the court's not trying to hear it, and you better prepare yourself because they're going to kill you, okay? And then here comes his girlfriend. She's blonde-headed.
And she comes in and sits down, and she's crying, and she's wringing her handkerchief, you know what I'm saying? They take him in there, and they put him, it's a gas chamber, and they put him in the gas chamber, and just as they drop the pellets, the telephone rings, and it was the governor with the stay, and he screams, ah! They killed him, and he wakes up, and he's in another jail cell, and the jailer says, Whitey, wake up. It was Blackie before. Whitey, wake up. Your lawyer's here. And another lawyer comes in, and he starts talking to this guy, and he's rubbing his head, and he goes, man, I was having a hell of a bad dream. I dreamed that they killed me. Lawyer tells him, hey, man, I did everything I could do, you know what I'm saying? But it didn't do any good, and this is going through. You better prepare yourself. The girlfriend comes in. This time it's a redhead. She's got big breasts, and she sits down and starts talking to him, and you can see the look in his eyes. He don't even know this woman, you know what I'm saying? As she's telling him, oh, you know, I've had your kids, and blah, 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 and then Frankie Jr., and this and that and another thing, and he's sitting there looking at her like, who the hell are you, you know? And so they take him in there, and it's the hangman's noose. They're on the hangman's scaffold. They put the hangman's noose around his neck, and they hit the lever right as the phone's ringing. It's the governor with a stake. It's too late. He starts screaming again. He wakes up in another jail cell. This goes on over and over again. Until finally he just wakes up screaming. And he don't quit screaming. And so when they put me on Texas death row, that I really identified with that, how he feels, because in a way that is what has happened to me. So I got to stay. I was resurrected. Did you see the tie-down team? What kind of guys are they? They're all pretty good size. The main one, the major, is pretty good size old boy. He looks like he played football in high school. They're all pretty good size. They're not. Oh, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking, you know, if you were a serial killer and you didn't want to get arrested by the police, man, this would be the job to have. You know what I'm saying? You know, I'm looking at them, and that's what's going through my mind. And apparently they see I'm really giving them the once-over, because when they're looking at me, they're kind of mean-mugging me because of the way I'm just staring at them, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying anything. And so they probably think, yeah, this one here, look at him. He looks like a damn killer. We're probably going to have to fight him. But that's not what's going through my mind. You know what I'm saying? I was thinking, damn, here's a whole pack of serial killers. The insanity of it, you know what I'm saying? It's like you feel like you're in a Twilight Zone moment, man, because it's just, it's like reality. They just grabbed it and twisted it inside out, and here you go. Now, it just doesn't even, you can't, I couldn't imagine working on a team like that where I'm going to go strap somebody down and kill them, you know?
Let's step back and look at what actually happened after that phone call, after those 23 minutes. Hank Skinner won his Supreme Court case in March 2011. The ruling established that convicted prisoners could sue under civil rights law to force DNA testing of evidence. It was a landmark decision, a legal victory that changed American law. But then came the hard part, actually testing the evidence. In 2012, after years of resistance, the state of Texas finally agreed to DNA testing. More than 180 tests were conducted on approximately 40 pieces of evidence collected from the crime scene. The results were supposed to answer the question, guilty or innocent, black or white. Final. They didn't. In November 2012, the Texas Attorney General's office released its findings. Skinner's DNA was discovered at 19 additional locations throughout the crime scene, on a knife blade used in the murders, in blood on a dresser, door frames, and walls, on doorknobs, a comforter, a tennis shoe. The state's position was clear. This confirmed Skinner's guilt, but Skinner's defense team saw something different in those same results. DNA testing revealed an unknown male contributor on one of the knives found on the front porch and on carpet samples from the bedroom where the sons were killed. Someone else had been there. Someone whose DNA was mixed with Skinner's and the victims. Testing of 4 hairs found in Twila Busby's hand showed 3 of them had a family link with the victims but didn't belong to them, with only 1 belonging to Skinner. These results could potentially implicate Robert Donnell, Twila's deceased maternal uncle. And then there was the jacket. Remember that blood-spattered windbreaker found beside Twila's body? The one with medium-velocity impact spatter on the forearms? The one Skinner said belonged to the uncle? The state lost it. The crucial piece of evidence simply disappeared. A witness was prepared to identify the jacket as belonging to Donnell, but the judge wouldn't admit the testimony. So what do you do when the DNA evidence points in multiple directions? When has the most important piece of physical evidence vanished? When both sides look at the same test results and reach opposite conclusions. In July 2014, Judge Stephen Emmert ruled that it was reasonably probable Skinner would still have been convicted even if the DNA evidence had been available at his trial. Skinner's attorneys appealed. They argued that the 3 hairs in Twila's hand, the unknown male DNA on the knife, the lost jacket, all of it should have created reasonable doubt. But in October 2022, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the ruling. The conviction stood. And Skinner, he kept fighting, even after 28 years on death row, even after washing clothes by hand until his fingers bent. Even after dreaming of avocados and washing machines and hugging his daughter without glass between them. He kept fighting. A 6th execution date was set, September 13th, 2023. But Hank Skinner never made it to that execution chamber. On February 16th, 2023, Henry Hank Skinner died at a hospital in Galveston, Texas. He was 60 years old, not by lethal injection, not strapped to a gurney 5 steps from that holding cell, not with witnesses watching through windows. He died from complications following surgery in December 2022 to remove a brain tumor. He had spent nearly 28 years in solitary confinement on death row, unable to leave his cell for more than an hour a day. 7 months before Texas planned to execute him, natural causes intervened. His attorneys released a statement. Mr. Skinner was still challenging his conviction at the time of his death, and we are deeply sorry that he passed away before those proceedings were complete. Still challenging. Until the very end, he never stopped maintaining his innocence. Never stopped pointing to Robert Donnell, Twila's uncle. Never stopped asking why that jacket disappeared. Never stopped questioning why unknown male DNA on a murder weapon wasn't enough to create doubt. The machinery of death didn't kill Hank Skinner, but it held him for 28 years while his body slowly broke down, while he washed clothes until his fingers crooked, while he dreamed of freedom that never came. And here's what we're left with. DNA evidence that both confirmed and questioned his guilt, depending on who interpreted it. A lost piece of crucial evidence. A judge who ruled the conviction would have stood anyway. And a man who died still proclaiming innocence. So was Hank Skinner guilty? I can't answer that, neither can you. And that's the point. The DNA testing found Skinner's DNA at 19 new crime scene locations away, but also found an unknown male contributor on a murder weapon and evidence suggesting someone from Twila's maternal family was present. Both things are true. Both things matter. What I can tell you is this. Hank Skinner's Supreme Court case created precedent that now allows other death row inmates to sue for DNA testing. Skinner versus Switzer changed American law. His fight expanded access to post-conviction DNA testing in Texas. His case forced the question, shouldn't we test everything before we take a life? But for Skinner himself, the answer came too late and in the wrong form. The DNA was tested, the results were disputed, the most important evidence vanished, and he died before anyone could agree on what it all meant. He was married to Sandrine Georges Skinner, a French activist who fought for him for over a decade, who married him through prison glass, who organized protests outside the U.S. Embassy in Paris, who believed in his innocence until the end. He had a daughter named Natalie Jo who came back into his life when he was 23 minutes from execution, who visited him through glass, who he never got to hug. He was a man who counted 26 expansion joints on a bridge, who remembered the smell of water when you're catfishing, who dreamed about washing machines and cried because he was grateful to watch one turn. He was Henry Watkins Skinner. He lived 60 years. He spent half of them waiting to die. And whether he was guilty of those murders on New Year's Eve 1993, we'll truly never know with absolute certainty. Because the evidence points in too many directions. Because crucial pieces disappeared. Because two sides looked at the same DNA results and saw completely different truths. The machinery of death doesn't require certainty. It only requires a conviction and a calendar. Hank Skinner is gone now. The case is closed, not by execution, but by death. And somewhere in Texas, in boxes in evidence rooms, DNA profiles sit in databases. Unknown male contributors, lost jackets that can't be tested, questions that were never fully answered. Here's what I need you to understand. This isn't a story about a man who was proven innocent. And it's not a story about a man who was proven guilty beyond all doubt. It's a story about the space in between, where evidence conflicts, where crucial items disappear, where both sides can look at DNA results and reach opposite conclusions. Hank Skinner fought for 28 years to get that evidence tested. He won a Supreme Court case, he changed American law, and when the testing finally happened, it didn't give us the clean answer anyone wanted. So here's my question for you. In a system where we execute people, is reasonably probable good enough? When DNA evidence is disputed, when the most important physical evidence is lost, when an unknown male contributor is found on a murder weapon, comment below. Not whether you think Skinner was guilty or innocent, I don't know, and neither do you for certain. Comment on this. Should we execute someone when the evidence creates questions that can be argued both ways? And if you want me to investigate another death row case where DNA evidence changed everything or didn't change enough, drop the name below, because Hank Skinner's story ended. But the questions he raised are still here. The machinery continues, just not for him. Subscribe to The Executioner's Pen for deep investigations into cases where the truth is never as simple as guilty or innocent. Next case drops next week. Justice demands more than probability. It demands certainty.